Hi there. This is Reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Chapter 20, Part 1. The second part of this chapter requires its own episode. You see where we were going philosophically in Chapter 19 with the Eureka moment and all, and the second part of the chapter really expands on it. So by virtue to having to devote a lot of bandwidth to Part 2, that necessitates me doing the first part today. And it's, like this whole book, it's interesting in its own right. As I'm doing this reading series, I've definitely noticed much more parallel pertaining to the topography, and that when they're in the novel part, when they're in the journey part of the book, there's a lot of parallel between the topography and what's going on in the Chautauqua, and I've probably been missing a lot of this so far. So I'm going to expand on that in this chapter. And I thought I'd do something a little different and read the entire text of this first part of chapter 20. It's about 35-40% of the chapter. And then I'll critique it to the best of my understanding of the book so far. Also, in light of the revelation given to me by John Vervaeke that I'm using this book and Lila as sacred texts, missing some things is invariable. Sacred texts are dynamic. They're never the same book. They change depending on where you are in your life. And certain things stand out to you at certain points. So that's fascinating. Also, texts like these are open to endless analysis and interpretation. So I'm going to attempt that. I will attempt a certain analysis and a certain interpretation now. Evidently I've slept. The sun is hot. My watch says a few minutes before noon. I look over the rock I'm leaning against and see Chris sound asleep on the other side. Way up above him, the forest stops and barren gray rock leads into patches of snow. We can climb the back of this ridge straight up there, but it would be dangerous toward the top. I look up at the top of the mountain for a while. What was it that Chris said I told him last night? I'll see you at the top of the mountain? No, I'll meet you at the top of the mountain. How could I meet him at the top of the mountain when I'm already with him? Something's very strange about that. He said I told him something else too the other night, that it's lonely here. That contradicts what I actually believe. I don't think it's lonely here at all. So in the last chapter, very oddly, the narrator avoided this topic. Now he's cautiously beginning to address it, but you can already hear a tinge of reluctance. The narrator does not identify himself with whoever was talking last night, and you can see through this. You can see through his avoidance and his denial that maybe even on an unconscious as well as an emerging conscious level, he doesn't like any implication of this. For example, why would the phrase meet you bother him? What would that imply? Think about that. I'll see you at the top of the mountain versus I'll meet you. He's already with Chris. Where is he? He pictures this variation of himself, say, as having the variation he is now, the narrator, as having, say, a positive attitude. And this attitude is held with a bit of pride, as if it's somehow better. Like, do you see the top of the mountain as lonely, or do you see it as not lonely? Well, then the narrator's implying that seeing it as lonely is, rather negative, unlike he is now. The sound of falling rock draws my attention over to one side of the mountain. Nothing moves, completely still. It's all right. You hear little rock slides like this all the time. Not so little sometimes, though. Avalanches start with little slides like that. If you're above them or beside them, they're interesting to watch. But if they're above you, no help then. You just have to watch it come. What we've been noticing all along, and what I really noticed, like I was saying in this chapter, and this is on how the journey, especially this part of it as they ascend the mountain, is parallel with the recalled philosophical journey of Phaedrus that is ongoing in this Chautauqua. People say strange things in their sleep, but why would I tell him I'd meet him? And why would he think I was awake? There's something really wrong here that produces a very bad quality feeling, but I don't know what it is. First you get the feeling, then you figure out why. All right, that line, first you get the feeling, then you figure out why. It says way more than it seems to. And this is a hint of where this philosophical journey is going. There's something in the structure of this that is really important. First, you get the feeling, then you figure out why. Obvious, but is it really? Do we really get this? Do we really understand what this means to first get the feeling? This is going to be explored a lot, but remember it for the time being. How do we detect bad quality and what do we do about it? So this narrator has a bad quality feeling. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes, feelings emerge that you don't like at all, and you just have to watch them happen. I hear Chris move and turn and see him look around. Where are we, he asks. Top of the ridge. Oh, he says. He smiles. I break open a lunch of Swiss cheese, pepperoni, and crackers. I cut up the cheese and then the pepperoni in careful, neat slices. The silence allows you to do each thing right. Again, the meditative consciousness is referred to here, and this reminds me, this reminds all of us, me in particular at this point, because I tend to rush, that there's another way to do things than rushing through them. Remember, before enlightenment, chopping wood and drawing water. After enlightenment, chopping wood and drawing water. So think about that and what that might mean in terms of what he's saying about doing each thing right. The silence in the forest on the side of the mountain allows you to contemplate as you climb, and during the contemplation, eventually the sky will shine through. And remember what he had said earlier about, whatever happens on the side of the mountain is just as important as the top. They work together. Let's build a cabin here, he says. Oh, I groan, and climb to it every day? Sure, he teases. That wasn't hard. Yesterday is long ago in his memory. Well, maybe not. Maybe he was really teasing. I pass some cheese and crackers over to him. What are you always thinking about, he asks. Thousands of things, I answer. That's true. What? Most of them wouldn't make any sense to you. This is something he's said a couple of times to people who've asked what he's been thinking about, and I can imagine it would be nearly impossible to convey to them the fact that he's contemplating a complete metaphysical restructuring of the way we see reality. But also right now he's thinking about something that's got him worried, and it affects his relationship to his son. Like what? Like why I told you I'd meet you at the top of the mountain. Oh, he says, and looks down. You said I sounded drunk, I tell him. No, not drunk, he says, still looking down. The way he looks away from me makes me wonder all over again if he's telling the truth. I think he's hoping that Chris is not telling the truth. How then? He doesn't answer. How then, Chris? Just different. How? Well, I don't know. He looks up at me, and there's a flicker of fear. Like you used to sound a long time ago, he says, and then looks down. When? When we lived here. Just what he was afraid of. I keep my face composed so that he sees no change of expression in it, and then carefully get up and go over and methodically turn the socks on the rock. They've dried long ago. As I return with them, I see his glance is still on me. Casually, I say, I didn't know I sounded different. He doesn't reply to this. I put the socks on and slip the boots over them. I'm thirsty, Chris says. We shouldn't have too far down to go to find water, I say, standing up. I look at the snow for a while and say, you ready to go? He nods and we get the packs on. As we walk along the summit toward the beginning of the ravine, we hear another clattering sound of falling rock, much louder than the first one I heard a while ago. I look up to see where it is, still nothing. So a second sound of falling rock that's louder. Is this a message he's getting from somewhere, that there's something else that's getting louder too? What was that? Chris asks. Rock slide. We both stand still for a minute, listening. Is there somebody up there? No, I think it's just melting snow that's loosening stones. When it's really hot like this in the early part of the summer, you hear a lot of small rock slides, sometimes big ones. It's part of the wearing down of the mountains. I didn't know mountains wore out. Not wore out, wore down. They get rounded and gentle. These mountains are still unworn. The mountain as a metaphor for the philosophical pursuit is obvious in this sentence. Remember that things are sharp and fresh. And then after time, they wear down and get soft. Think about the many, many ways mountains are used in this book. Think about a brilliant man with genius notions, whose thoughts are so sharp and who gets worn down by societal intervention. He's become soft. There's no doubt among the many metaphors that the mountain also represents the man himself. Everywhere around us now, except above, the sides of the mountain are covered with blackish green of the forest. In the distance, the forest looks like velvet. I say, you look at these mountains now, and they always look so permanent and peaceful, but they're changing all the time, and the changes aren't always peaceful. Underneath us, beneath us, here right now, there are forces that can tear this whole mountain apart. Well, I don't need to interpret it all that much, but the narrator himself, with his body and his face, look permanent to Chris. Chris doesn't know. Chris doesn't understand, really, or neither do we, and neither does the narrator right now. But we know underneath this visage that always looks the same, there are forces that threaten to tear him apart eternally, like the mysterious emergence of this alter ego the night before that rambled on until 3 a.m, from which he remains dissociated from, except for the one way he thinks is useful, and that's intellectually. Do they ever? Ever what? Tear the whole mountain apart. Yes, I say, and then I remember. Not far from here are 19 people lying dead under millions of tons of rock. Everyone was amazed there were only 19. What happened? They were just tourists from the east who had stopped for the night at a campground. During the night, the underground forces broke free. Sorry, I can't help it. And when the rescuers saw what had happened the next morning, they just shook their heads. They didn't even try to excavate. All they could have done was dig down through hundreds of feet of rock for bodies that would just have to be buried all over again. So they left them there. They're still there now. How did they know there were 19? Neighbors and relatives from their hometowns reported them missing. Chris stares at the top of the mountain before us. Didn't they get any warning? I don't know. You'd think there'd be a warning. Maybe there was. Okay. Again, not one word of this novel is disposable. This is something that I know and that you know. And that what is fascinating is you don't see it all at once. And I'm going back to, the notion of this being a sacred text. You will never will, because the nature of these is they pull together relevance for what you need at the time you're reading them. The Bible, for example, has been an endless source of inspiration for endless amounts of sermons in the past, now, and in the future. So now what I'm seeing, which I didn't see before, is this very tight parallel of the journey up the mountain with Chris and what is going on again with the narrator, with Phaedrus, and the emergence of his new metaphysics that the narrator is remembering. So in this case, maybe there was a warning. And you could go back through this. You can interpret everything I've read. I'm going to only interpret it this way. You can go into this whole thing about burying and excavating that he's talking about and make parallels. So maybe there was a warning. There might have been one last night. Maybe the warning is that you can't use one part of Phaedrus without experiencing the other. The power of these forces is enough. This story also illustrates how powerful these forces are. And the story about the 19 campers serves two purposes. One, it's interesting history for the area, and another is it exemplifies how powerless you can be as you experience whatever kind of avalanche is happening in real time, whether it's in the physical world or the psychological one, and how truly destructive that avalanche can be. We walk to where the ridge we are on creases inward to the start of the ravine. I see now we can follow this ravine down and eventually find water in it. I start angling down now. Some more rocks clatter above. Suddenly I'm frightened. Chris, I say. You know what I think? No, what? I think we'd be very smart if we let that mountaintop go for now and try it another summer. He's silent. Then he says, why? I have bad feelings about it. He doesn't say anything for a long time. Finally he says, like what? Oh, I just think we could get caught up there in a storm or a slide or something and we'd be in real trouble. Now, it's obvious that's true. But what else does he mean by this? Is he referring to the possibility, is he referring to the possibility of them joining the 19 campers underneath those rocks, or is he worried about some other kind of trouble? Let's just say in this case he's being a responsible father. Right now, in terms of the actual physicality of the situation, that's a reasonable way to see it. But it's important to Chris to get to the top of the mountain, so it's also reasonable to, help him try a little bit more maybe, or is it as dangerous as he thinks, or, Chris could use a little of this whole dynamic ascension. He needs this, but this ascension is threatening to the narrator right now. The ascension to the high country of the mind is transformative. But is that transformative always, is that kind of transformation, is it always better? Is it always a good thing? More silence. I look up and see real disappointment in his face. I think he knows I'm leaving something out. Why don't you think about it, I say, and then when we get to some water and have lunch, we'll decide. We continue walking down. Okay, I say. He finally says, okay, in a non-committal voice. The descent is easy now, but I see it will be deeper soon. It is still open and sunny here, but soon we'll be in the trees again. I don't know what to make of all this weird talk at night, except that it's not good for either of us. It sounds like all the strain of this cycling and camping in Chautauqua and all these old places has a bad effect on me, and that appears at night. I want to clear out of here as fast as possible. I don't suppose that sounds like the old days to Chris either. I spook very easily these days, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. How virtuous. He never spooked at anything. Never. That's the difference between us. That's why I'm alive and he's not. If he's up there, some psychic entity, some ghost, some doppelganger, waiting up there for us in God knows what fashion, well, he's going to have to wait a long time. A very long time. Again, somehow being spooked easily is a better version of himself, safer, more cautious, less of a risk taker. Maybe a more responsible father in the physical world. So this is where he is now. This is what he wants. To hell with you, Phaedrus. You're not coming back. Those damn heights get eerie after a while. I want to go down, way down, far, far down, to the ocean. That sounds right, where the waves roll in slowly and there's always a roar, where you can't fall anywhere, you're already there. So, the exact opposite, and there's going to be more about that. Now we enter the trees again, and the sight of the mountaintop is obscured by their branches, and I'm glad. I think we've gone as far along Phaedrus' path as we want to go in this Chautauqua 2. I want to leave this path now. I've given him all due credit for what he thought and said and wrote, and now I want to develop on my own some of the ideas he neglected to pursue. The title of this Chautauqua is Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, not Zen in the Art of Mountain Climbing. There are no motorcycles on the tops of mountains, and in my opinion, very little Zen. Zen is the spirit of the valley, not of the mountaintop. The only Zen you can find on the tops of mountains is the Zen you bring up there. Let's get out of here. Okay, so that's a very different contrast. Now you're sort of seeing another dichotomy. You've got, I guess you would say yin and yang. You've got someone who's totally caught up in yang and the pursuit of these lofty ideas and the masculine, and now you've got the more feminine side of the narrator, say, the peaceful, the one that wants peace, the one that wants harmony, the one that wants Zen. But is that an excuse, or is that kind of the dichotomy about, kind of like staying in the romantic or staying in the classic? Do you want to be a Zen master? Do you want to be a bodhisattva? That's always, that's what is more virtuous, to be a sage or to be a sage and to be someone who spreads wisdom in the world. Again, he's framing himself as virtuous, and he says, I've given you credit. But do you believe that? Can you use a person like that? Use one part of him and then dispense with the rest? Feels good going down, doesn't it, I say. Yeah, because it's safe. No answer. We're going to have a little fight, I'm afraid. You go up the mountaintop and you're going to get, and all you're going to get is a great big heavy stone tablet handed to you with a bunch of rules on it. That's about what happened to him. Thought he was a goddamn messiah. Not me, boy. The hours are way too long and the pay is way too short. Let's go. Let's go. So he was given an order, a set of rules at the top of that mountain. That rule was a directive to be committed. So maybe the fear is another hospital stay. Now that's kind of a reasonable fear, and maybe it's not worth going through that for this other, this other uniting thing that we're kind of hinting at. Maybe not even hinting. This kind of, maybe that's why he just wants to separate the good part from the bad part, so to speak. It is reasonable not to want to go back to the psych ward, and so maybe we'll just chill out on the narrator for a minute and let him be afraid of something that is reasonable to be afraid of. So I'm clomping down the slope in a kind of two-step idle gallop, gadump, 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 until I hear Chris holler, slow down. And he is a couple of 100 yards back through the trees. So I slow down. But after a while, see, he's deliberately lagging behind. He's disappointed, of course. I suppose what I ought to do in the Chautauqua is just point out in summary form the direction Phaedrus went, without evaluation, and then get on with my own thing. Believe me, when the world is not seen as a duality of mind and matter, but as a trinity of quality, mind, and matter, then the art of motorcycle maintenance and other arts take on a dimension of meaning they never had. The specter of technology the Sutherlands are running from becomes not an evil, but a positive, fun thing. And to demonstrate that will be a long, fun task. So that statement in particular gives us a sense of, in this book, there is a use for it, which is, and this is a big deal. It's very useful to us now as we find ourselves in the midst of an era of information technology that is now so present, so predominant, that we need some guidance. I propose, as I have in the past, that the approach to technology in this book is going to help us. Technology is not all bad or all good. It's what it is, but it can become evil and has in the past. And on the cusp of autonomous AI, this is indeed what we want to avoid. Hell. But first, to give this other specter his walking papers, I should say the following. Perhaps he would have gone in the direction I'm now about to go in if this second wave of crystallization, the metaphysical wave, had finally grounded out where I'll be grounding it out. That is, in the everyday world. I think metaphysics is good if it improves everyday life, otherwise forget it. I agree with that statement. The statement that metaphysics is good if it improves everyday life. It's a lot of what I want to do with this Pearson project, is figure out how this can improve everyday life and my vocation and my direction in this. That describes really the main stimulus, the main focus of this project. And hopefully I can find a way to do it. But unfortunately for him, it didn't ground out. It went through into a third metaphysical wave crystallization from which he never recovered. Although, I think any understanding of reality today has to include the mystical. I think this something like this is really what we're working on in this corner of the internet. We want to do this, practical application of metaphysics, but how are we going to do it without the mystical element? And I think this is the problem. The narrator is trying to separate that out because it's too scary. It resulted in something very bad for him in the past. He's saying that there's a negative aspect to the mystical, and there certainly was for him in terms of what transpired. But I propose this part might be really the most important, along with the practical application, just as important for the purposes of the way we need to understand reality in order to proceed. So the next chapter, we're going to explore this very important mystical wave of crystallization. And he states right here, it was his undoing. So let's just say it was the cleavage. It was the little rock slide. The cleavage in the crystallization, or the little rock slide that caused the avalanche. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next Sunday for a very exciting, I think, part 2 of chapter 20.